Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. Today, I'm joined by my co-host,
Ben Wilson. I teach myself TypeScript so I can write scripts at Databricks.
So impressive. Just blows my mind every time I hear it. So we are on hour one. So we're 1 hour and 41 minutes deep into our recording and just press play. Prior to this, we have been talking about some very interesting things about the human condition and how to convince people of your idea. And even more specifically, how to convince someone that your idea is their idea. If it's their idea, they will believe it more strongly and they will champion it throughout their organization and hopefully drive change. So we're going to start this episode with a bit of a scenario, something that both Ben and I have seen. It refers to the buy versus build, and it depends upon a variety of factors, but let's just set it up really quick. So I am an engineer on my team, and I think that there's some people maybe in my organization who are not quite as technically competent as my amazing self. So I'm going to go build a framework that makes joins in Spark a lot easier. And this framework will leverage YAML as a config. We will write out files and read them back in, and that config will determine how a join is performed. So these analysts that only know SQL and can only read English, they're going to be joining things left and right. Ben, what are your initial thoughts on this framework?
I've seen this framework many times, and I've always had the same reaction to it, which is confusion. When I first see it, I wonder, was it easier to build that than it would have been to teach the people to just do the basic applied engineering tasks? And I've never gotten a straight answer from anybody who's built one of those. Usually it's, well, we're not resourced to train people, or we don't have training material for that. Like, well, how many? And then I'll ask, like, how many hours did it take you to build this? And usually it's a very large number. And the maintenance burden of it is usually pretty substantial. But I never get a confident answer to any of the questions that I ask about why does this exist. I usually get like a panicked look from people when they start talking about it. Like, they're proud at first, like, hey, look at this cool thing I built. And then I start asking, like, why did you build this? And then I get this like defeated. You kind of see the stages of grief unfold in front of you as somebody realizes that they might have made a mistake in creating this thing. It's usually when they're talking to somebody like the job I used to do, the job you currently do, it's because they're having troubles with what they built or what they're maintaining, or, okay, we have this interface, but you guys keep on changing Spark, or you keep on changing APIs. And can you support these new features and stuff? Or how do I make this work with this new thing? I can't migrate to a newer version. So it's never at the point when they build that it's brand new and there are no issues. It's usually like a year later, they're like, help me.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely selection bias in the people that we talk to in the field. People typically, they don't have enough staff to do what they want to do, or they don't have the technical expertise to do what they want to do. And for this scenario specifically, I've seen it a bunch, like a little bit too much. And depending upon the audience, it's actually a pretty simple checklist to get them to change their perspective. But I'm curious, Ben, I would love your feedback on my checklist.
Sure.
So let's say we go into a room and they've abstracted some monstrosity on top of a solid open source framework that actually works. What I typically like to say is, first, the amount of maintenance that is required on this open source, on the wrapper around the open source framework, is just not worth it. Second, I say that if you guys want job security, that's great. But if you want to go to another organization with skills that are transferable, don't build an in-house solution that can't transfer. Instead, learn the base framework. That makes your job skills a lot more relevant. And specifically for engineers, like mid-level and below, they love hearing that. They're like, oh my God, if I become an expert at companies XYZ's library, that doesn't transfer. But if I become an expert at Spark, that does transfer. Those are the first two that I typically say. What are your thoughts?
No, those are good. I usually do a bunch of pre-work before I get into the, to preface this, my main motivation in getting somebody to listen to advice that I'm pretty confident that they don't want to hear in the first couple of minutes of meeting me, is to read the room. And what I mean read the room is, I've never been in an engagement with a customer like that, where they've built something like this, where there's not one person in the room that everybody defers to. So if you ask questions about like, hey, what are you working on? And what's your most challenging thing that you've built? Or what are you most proud of? Those simple, soft questions, I don't care what they're answering at all. I don't care what they built. It's irrelevant. There's tons of people building cool stuff all the time, everywhere. Software is an ephemeral thing, it's always evolving, and there's a lot of people who know how to do really cool things with it. So I never really got that excited, because I've been at places before doing that job where I saw people do stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool. After you see your 10,000th project of somebody doing something cool, or participating in a hackathon where you see a bunch of cool things that are built, nothing becomes cool anymore. It's just like, is this useful? Yes or no? What problem does it solve? So I'm asking those questions for one purpose only. Who's the person that talks the most? Because that's the person who came up with the ideas. And then you start asking progressively more challenging questions about, they're still soft level. They're not antagonistic, but it's more just to see if that person who is answering all of those, provided they're not the manager, who speaks up first when you question what they've done in a very innocuous way. That's the person whose idea it was, guaranteed. Who are like, hey, we're doing this, and this is why it's so important. Everybody get on board. And you can then further test what the dynamics of the room are by asking an intentionally stupid question and preface it with like, hey, this might be a stupid question or something, feign ignorance about what it is that they're working on. Usually if you've seen stuff like this built, like how this got built and why it exists. But you want to be able to see, like, was this a resume builder that somebody thought was a good idea? Or is somebody a true believer who thought that this is the right way to do something? So who defends it the fastest? And that'll be the person, definitively, that will be the person who came up with the idea. And if it's all that one person, you have group type A in my book, which is one person who has a lot of confidence and seems to dominate that group organization. They probably believe very strongly that they're the smartest person in the room. And that could be true. They could be like the most technically competent person. They could be the most senior person. But you really want to feel out that dynamic and look at other people as you're asking the questions, just to see their face, like their facial expressions. Are they smiling when you're asking that one question that's like, hey, this might be dumb, but like, why did you build this? And if you get some people who kind of like grin back or roll their eyes, you're like, okay, there's other people in this room that know this is stupid. And the reason we're talking about this and the dumpster fire that it is because these other people can't actually talk to that lead person who seems to have all the great ideas, the genius in the room. So it then becomes, navigating around that. There's ways to do that I found are successful. But then you also have like the type B environment where everybody's answering collectively as a group and giving the same sorts of answers. So it's a very, very cohesive team that came through groupthink together to think that this is a good idea. And there's no one person that's kind of dominating as the voice of why these decisions were made. That takes a different tact of eventually convincing them, not that like my idea is the right way, because I never approach anything that way. I wouldn't even be able to count how many times I've been wrong. But the idea of what I'm doing over time with working with that team is to figure out what don't they like, why did they go down this path in the first place, and then get their ideas for how to get out of this situation.
Got it. How do you do this over Zoom, especially with people who have cameras off?
I always used to ask that people turn them on.
What's your line? It's like, hey, we're all going to be friends here. Let's turn our cameras on. Or is it turn your cameras on now? What's your line?
I'm not a threatening guy. That wouldn't go. I'm kidding. A lot of people have told me that I'm threatening, but definitely
Really?
not do like an antagonistic, like, hey, I've got my camera on. Why isn't yours on?
Yeah.
That doesn't set a good tone. But I don't think I have like one particular pattern of it. Sometimes you don't even have to say anything. You just join the meeting and people start doing intros and you just explicitly turn your camera on. A lot of people see that and they're like, oh, he wants us to see it, his face. So I should do that as well. A lot of times that just works.
Yeah.
We have policies internal in engineering and Databricks that most people will turn their cameras on. It's like the expectation, because being able to see somebody's face when you're talking to them is very effective for communication.
Yeah, way more efficient. Okay, so step one, get your bearings, read the room, figure out who is who. Let's say throughout that process, we've determined that this new feature is horseshit and it should not have been invested in. What are your thoughts on proceeding with next steps in terms of changing behavior?
So instead of, I'll tell you what doesn't work. And I know it doesn't work because I've tried it early in my time with talking to people. Walking in, being the answer person and just adopting a dictatorial tone of like, this isn't how you should do this. This is, here's the proper way to do this. You're going to get maybe 20% of the time people will be in such a state of dejection that they actually will listen and just want you to tell them how to do it. The other 80% plus time, you're just going to get resistance. You're going to get anger. You're going to get people that are actually just flat out offended. Not a lot of people want to hear straight out of the gate of talking to somebody who they feel is an expert coming in and being like, you guys suck. Like everything you do sucks. That just feels terrible and it's not productive. And it's not true. They're professionals. They've built something maybe without guidance that they thought was solving a problem that was the right way to solve it. But they obviously aren't in a place where they feel like what they've done is good. So you get a lot further by just listening and being understanding with them, particularly in tech. A lot of people don't think that that's a factor, but if you're somebody that comes in, even if you are an expert and you're just being kind of a jerk and calling it like you see it and being blunt like that, there are tons of people that behave that way. And what you're going to inspire is fear. And you're going to inspire people to be like, okay, this person has told me something that I kind of already knew, but they're saying it in such a way that makes me feel bad or makes me feel like I'm incompetent. You've now set the stage for expectations to be not an interaction or relationship with you that is team-based or collaborative, it's now I'm coming in to tell you how to fix the problem that you created. You get a different dynamic when you do that. Will you get the same will you get an output that solves the problem? Sure. They'll get something else, some other way of doing something. They're not going to like you. And I know a lot of people think that that doesn't matter, but that matters more than anything else. So if you are interacting with a team and they are like completely inspired by how you handled that situation, like, hey, this person's like, they're really nice and they're really helpful and collaborative and they wanted to work with our team. You've now built that relationship with them where you can talk about other things other than this immediate problem that they need to solve, but they all feel like the solution that is going to be built, they were a part of, because you're listening to their ideas and you're incorporating their ideas. They're not idiots. You know, they all have minds and they can come up. They just don't have as broad of experience maybe as a consultant would. But they can think. So leverage that. And a lot of times you're going to get ideas from them that you never thought of. So best idea wins. Like, hey, let's all collaborate on this. And the sooner you establish that rapport with a team that has kind of done something that they've gotten off the rails with, the sooner you now have a more cohesive team. Because we as a species love to solve problems. The only thing we love more than solving problems is to solve problems together. And that goes across all personality types. Everybody loves that.
Yeah, that does make sense. All right, I had a few reactions. One of them is I completely agree about getting people to like you. And I think it's up to your own style. I typically am the small talk guy at the beginning of the call that says some like stupid, funny joke, and then we all laugh and then we start working. But there are many different ways to do it. That's just a vibe that has worked for me. Another point is you said that assuming that someone is an idiot or that they built something wrong is not correct. I think that's so vital. Empathy is about truth seeking. It's about being completely honest. And as an employee, seeing the truth is sort of your job. I don't think there's I'm going out on a limb, but I think there's very few roles where seeing the truth is not important. And so it's not about being nice, in my opinion, although like hopefully you're a nice person. It's about going to the root cause, the root truth. And no one would build something because they're dumb. That's not a motivation. People would build something because they want a resume booster, because their boss told them to and they were too scared to push back, because there's many reasons. But being an idiot is just not the truth. So don't go off that as a first principle for action. Mm-hmm. Those were a couple things. But Ben, I had a question to turn it back around to you. So, all right, we've read the room and we've sort of set more of the stage for understanding motivations. Do you tell people when they're wrong? And if so, how?
It's much more effective, in my opinion. And high functioning tech organizations do this by nature of how they do business. If you walk up to somebody and say, hey, what you built sucks, you could interact with somebody who has the fortitude to take that in stride and agree with you and be like, yeah, let's fix it. There's not a lot of people that I've met that can do that and are like genuinely interested in just making something better and owning up to the fact that, yeah, I made all these these mistakes. I created all these problems. Yep. That was dumb. I'm ready to fix it. You're generally going to get people that you're either going to fake that response, but then their feelings get hurt, you know? And that's an important thing to kind of be aware of. So the better way that I have found that works in 100% of situations is to have them get to a point where they admit themselves to you openly without you prompting them to do it. You don't lead them down a path of like, tell me that this sucks. Come on. I want to hear that you know that this is terrible. You get them to just admit it after going through the process of talking about it. So usually if somebody built something, there's a reason they built it. So you get down to those, as you said, like first principles of projects. So sometimes you can say, hey, can we take a look at the original design of this? Like, where's the documentation about the project plan for this thing? The vast majority of times you're going to have nothing come back. You'll get like, oh, it was more organic. We built it over time. Like, even if you can see that, that's fine. But you have to lead them down this path of realizing that there's a better way to do stuff. So if you ask questions about the things that you know is a proper way to build projects and they don't have it, they'll start thinking like, wait a minute, we don't do that. Is that how things are done or how things should be done? And sometimes they'll ask like, well, if we had the design, would this have ever been built? They'll think that in their head. Like, we probably never would have built this if we had put it on paper first.
Wait, are you down to do a little role play?
Sure.
Cool. All right. As you were talking, I was thinking through the worst abominations that I've built over the past 2 years at Databricks. Of course, I've never done anything bad for a customer. So we'll just talk about an internal tool. This internal tool was born out of a really great need and was mediocrely built. It was the best I could do at the time. And they're also sort of hard problems. And since then, we've iterated upon it and have a very robust solution to solve this issue. So it's now been solved by a team of several, primarily field people, but maybe some engineers as well. So this tool was a TPC DS benchmarking one-click solution. And what all of that means basically is when you're looking to benchmark whether a warehouse, so think Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks, SQL, you name it, whether a warehouse performs, there's a bunch of representative data sets and representative queries of OLAP workloads, so online analytical processing. That's typically what an analyst would run against to do their day-to-day job. So this data set and these sets of queries are meant to be representative of that type of workload. And my tool, again, was born out of necessity. I had worked with a couple customers on benchmarking against warehouses, Databricks warehouses specifically. And setting it up is hard. Doing concurrency is hard. And so what I look to do is create a one-click solution that basically, if you just install this library and press play, it will be a config-driven solution that would actually go and load test against a warehouse. Mm-hmm. Since doing that, I've realized that it was a complete and total waste of time. It got no adoption whatsoever, at least a waste of time from that aspect. I learned a ton, generally had a good time doing it, but and met a lot of cool people along the way, but it got literally zero adoption, and we canned it and have done it properly. So let's roll back a year. Say I have just completed this. I just did my tech summit talk. I'm really proud of it. And I have my heels dug in that this is the best solution ever. What would you do to change my mind?
I would start with that same question, like, why did you build this? And not in a rude way. I want to hear your perspective of what problem were you solving?
So the scenario is multiple customers had asked me to do benchmarking against Databricks SQL Warehouse. I ended up building tooling and then reusing this tooling across customers. And after the third customer or whatever, I went to the Databricks SQL SME channel and said, hey, I've done this 700 times. Would this be a good thing to repurpose and maybe put in an internal repo that's public? It's currently public as well. And hopefully other people can use this for their own benefit.
Sounds legit to me.
I agree.
Yeah, that's the purpose of code, right? Like,
sure.
Make it so that you don't have to do a bunch of annoying stuff over and over again. So far, so good. Cool. How many people have used it so far?
Just about plus or minus 0.
And how many people have to do this workload at the company? 4 customers.
How many people or how many projects? Either way, it's a lot.
People and projects. Are we talking 10, 100, 1,000 in the last year?
That is a great question. Every single Databricks customer account of sufficient size would have a warehouse play and will want to basically compare Databricks performance with some other warehouse. So Databricks has 10,000 customers, let's say 2,000 of them are mature enough for this tool, but theoretically many more. And let's call it 2,000 projects over, I don't know, 300 people, 200 people.
Okay. And how many times does it run per customer?
My tool is run 0 times because no one uses it. But how many times is this scenario run? It's typically once at the initial compete when you're deciding what tech stack to land on.
Cool. So it's a one-time use at certain customers, but a whole bunch of people would have to potentially use it.
And it's very expensive to do right. It requires a lot of subject matter knowledge, and also it's not trivial to set up if you're going to do it right. So it's pretty time intensive per customer.
And this tool is going to acquire the data sets, load them in a specific way that's transparent to the user, give you a bunch of reports about how everything is set up. And then it has an interface that allows you to just run the tests with some pre-configured infrastructure.
Yeah, like you have 6 parameters like concurrency, max load. You can also do load shapes. And yes, everything is open source and transparent.
And how many customers demand this be run? Is this something that consultants do to prove a point, or is this something customers demand is run before they accept?
That's a great call out. I think probably like 30% of customers demand, 70% of consultants use it to sell.
And how much time savings are we talking about? Is this like without using the tool, this is going to take 2 weeks of effort of 8-hour days? Or is this, it's annoying to do it manually, but I can get it done in a day?
Well, it's a twofold issue. The first is having the subject matter expertise to do it right. That, like learning all of that is months of work on top of a full-time job. And
so when you say do it right, does that mean that the report result will be completely erroneous and non-useful? Or if you do it wrong, you still get a report that just doesn't happen to be accurate?
There will be a report. The report will be erroneous, and that may lead to incorrect conclusions.
Okay. So that's the first problem that I see with providing tooling for something. So if somebody can do the job themselves, but they still get an output that may be within some margin of error that still makes the product look good, there's no incentive to use something that is.
Let me clarify. Their result would make the product look worse or just unbelievably better. It's not within a margin of error, typically.
Are we talking worse as in, hey, if you set this all up wrong, it looks so bad that no customer would ever use it? They're yes. Like, hey, this is a 10,000 times less performant than your marketing documentation says.
10,000 times is a lot, but I've seen that happen multiple times where it's a couple orders of magnitude worse than it actually is due to like.
So in that scenario, does a customer immediately say, I'm not going to use your product?
Sure. So
if they do that, does the person who's running the test then phone a friend and say, hey, why is this so broken? And then some expert comes in, fixes it real quick, gets the test to run properly, and then
no, it's usually they're like, because it's an easy answer. And if they're not already sold on the platform, it's an easy, like, this platform sucks, let's go use a different one. The experts even came in and built the tool.
Interesting. So I'd say that's high stakes, and that's more of a people problem than a tooling problem if the people running the test can't detect that there's an issue with it. So that would be more educational and standards based. So it seems to me like there should be a tool to automate that, if that's the case.
I agree, the need is there.
The other side is a little bit scarier to me, though, because that's going to be an uphill battle fighting against. If you're convinced that your implementation is the correct way to do it, and you've validated that and got sign off by a bunch of different people who are like the people who built the system, like the engineering teams that built Catalyst and Photon and stuff, like performance optimization engineers, they're like, yeah, this is the right way to do it. And then people can go and manually run the test and it performs better than the results of your tool. Everybody's going to think your tool is broken. So if they get better performance by running the testing correctly, those numbers incentivize the customer to sign up, even if they're incorrect, because it makes it look like it's faster, better, cheaper, even if the real product on their real data isn't going to run that well. So that's where you're going to get, that's where this no longer becomes a software problem. This becomes an institutional, like, behavioral problem.
Okay.
Because that's like sabotaging, for personal gain. Because the people running the test want to get the sell, right? They want money. They want that account. So if they see a faster number with the way that their expert, air quote, expert is running it, they're going to go with that number, even if it takes them 3 days to run it manually in however they were doing it. So you'll probably never get anybody to use it if they think that they have a way to cheat that number to be better.
Sure. But yeah, let's say this is replacing the expert. They don't even know that there's a incorrect way to do it that would make the product look better.
Yeah, then you've got a marketing problem. Assuming that your implementation is solid, and it's when you're talking about building a tool for people to use, the key to adoption on that 100% is you have to overcome a threshold of acceptance, which is related to how much easier is this than anything else. So if it's something that needs to get done, that's really important, there's a way that people know how to do it manually. You're creating a tool that's going to try to do this same thing in an automated fashion. If your tool isn't just dumb simple or is faster than doing it manually and is not designed in such a way that it's so intuitive to use, you're probably not going to get adoption. Or you're going to have to fight against that impetus of yeah, I don't really need a tool. I know how to do this. But if the tool is that good, where it's like, hey, this is like a one-liner to just instantiate this, and it automates hundreds of tasks for me, and I don't have to think about anything. I don't need additional configs to be written. I just run this thing, and it gives me the answer. Then it's like, yeah, it's pretty good. You're going to see adoption.
Right.
But now you're asking a question about why isn't somebody using my tool? We're now moving kind of assuming that the tool is very easy and very high level and automates all the annoying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're now getting into the realm of product design, which is, hey, we built this cool thing. Why doesn't anybody use it? We don't do that on our side when we're building new stuff. I mean, you saw it recently with tracing, right?
Yeah.
The process of building that, if we had just built it and then wrote docs and just did a release, maybe wrote a blog or something, we're not going to get a lot of people using it or talking about using it. So what we do is you identify customers who have this need. Those are the ones that we were building it for in the first place. And you talk with them every week and have them test early builds and point out what's working, what's not working, what additional features are going to be more relevant. And every week you're continually talking to them until you get to that point where hey, we think we have the first official version of this that we're about to release. You have them basically give a thumbs up, thumbs down on this. And any sort of bugs that are in it, you scramble and fix real quick. And then you do your release and then you talk about it. You do a pseudo marketing campaign around this. You get the word out there hey, this is now a thing. It doesn't stop there though. There's still work that's done after that release where you're doing promotion of this And then you're going back to the design board again. Like, how do we further lower, like everybody that we've had use this with the way that we are doing it have all these amazing things to say. And they think this is really important and really great. Well, now you start looking at the product and saying, can we make this easier for people to use? Can we make it so that this just turns on automatically for them and they start using it? So when they need it, they already have it.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother product design that you're going through and then getting feedback on that. And maybe you have to make adjustments to the thing that you built in order to make it work in that way.
Let's take a bit of a step back though. So I 100% agree with everything you're saying, but how would you go about convincing me, the angry stakeholder that loves his product through and through, how would you convince me of your ideas for what the next steps should be? You just told me the next steps, but is that what you would do? You just outright say, all right, these are the 7 things that you should go try?
I'd start asking leading questions to see if you understand that that's maybe an effective way to see if you can get usage of it up.
All right, let's hear it.
Let's say, how many people have you shown this to?
Like 2, or like 5, I don't know. Small number.
So we'll use the upper end. We'll say 5. How many people could use this tool?
300 over 2,000 projects.
Okay, so what's your plan on expanding from 5 to 50? And how are you going to do that?
Oh, light bulb. I don't have a plan. I don't know. I've never marketed a tool internally. Ben, what do you suggest? Is that the inflection point that you were looking for?
I mean, maybe. My homework to you at that point would be go find 5 more people and have them use it. But don't be there when they use it. Don't be in the room. Don't be hovering over their shoulder, pointing out how to use it. Give them the tool and the docs and just ask for candid feedback. Say, hey, can you tell me if this sucks or not? And have them run it. You're going to get a lot of feedback. So if you self-select those first 5 people or those 2 people, those are usually safety selections. That's just how our brains are wired. We want to get somebody that kind of knows us, and they're probably going to be somewhat promotional in whatever we worked on. They're not going to be blunt about things if it sucks. They're going to sugarcoat things, or they're going to have more positive than negative things to say. So it's good to get that in the first phases, but get people that are willing to give you feedback that most people wouldn't want to hear, but tell them that as well. Like, hey, if you see things that you don't like, please tell me, because I want to fix those. Or if you have ideas of ways to make this better, let me know. I want to do that. But then after that first phase, think about it as like a business to customer relationship. You might have a good relationship with them, but the reason that you're building things for them is because they're giving you money in order to build those things. So there's incentive there. Like, they stop giving you money if you make garbage. So you make less garbage, they give you more money. It's kind of like how that whole thing works. And you can also do that with peers. If there's somebody who has to do this job, but they don't personally know you, if you engage with them, they're no longer influenced by that personal relationship of like being nice effectively. They'll just be honest. And you might not get it from every single one of them. Some people just are naturally nice. They don't want to say negative things about something that somebody did. But if you canvass enough people, you're going to get some people who are just brutally honest, or just want to be providing constructive feedback. And they might say some things like, hey, I don't know why you built this thing in Python. Like, why isn't this a bash script? They can just do all this, and then it would be simple, and just run. Or it could be, somebody giving the exact opposite advice of like, why isn't this a Scala library that has all of these, traits defined for this configuration? You get all sorts of random responses, but if you collect enough data on this and you give them a series of questions to answer as they're evaluating it, and those questions might be like, will you use this? Yes or no? Do you think this is a good idea to use at customer sites? Yes or no? What are the 5 things you hate about this most? What are the 5 things you love about this most? You collect enough information from all of these random people, you're going to get, a Pareto of issues. You're going to get a Pareto of good ideas that were in this thing. And you're going to get, feedback of, was this even worthwhile? Yes or no? But I would also ask, if you were presenting this tool as something that you've already built and you're ready to ship it, like it's done, I would be like, hey, Michael, like, what was all the feedback that you got when you asked like 20 people before you wrote your first line of code? Like, can I see all of those responses? And we could go through that together.
Yeah, so in my scenario, I was simply solving an issue that I had and that I know because I'm a subject matter expert and a genius that everybody else has this issue. And so I just built tooling that solved it and then packaged it up in a nice, very easy to use framework. And anybody who thinks that it's not perfect is wrong.
So did they say that when you, like, before you built it? Like,
well, no, they're just idiots. I didn't get feedback because people are dumb.
Okay. Let me tell you how we do it. And I'll just give you an explanation of how it's done when we build stuff. So that's where this conversation would go.
Yeah.
I would get that, because that admission that you would make, even if you gave that flippant response, which I know you wouldn't give that flippant response, but even if you had, internally in your subconscious, you're immediately going to be thinking like, oh no, he just asked me a question that I totally should have done that before I wrote this thing. Like, gotten some sort of understanding of like, is this a problem that needs solving? And if everybody was like, nah, this isn't important, you're never going to convince them that this is worthwhile. If everybody just dunks on the idea, build something else, like go find another problem to solve. If it's something that makes your life easier and it works really great for every time you have to do this, use it, man. Build it, but build it as lean and as like low level as you possibly can. Bash script. Like, hey, I need to automate this thing because I hate spending 3 days setting all this crap up.
Just get it done.
Write a script. Yeah, GSD code, man. All of us have loads of it in engineering. Just like, hey, I've got these random JavaScript scripts or Python scripts or Bash scripts that automate something that I hate doing. I've got stupid stuff like, I'm looking at it on screen right now. I have like many Mac users. I have ZSH as my terminal manager. I've got my ZSH for all my formatting and stuff. And I've got a very unique scheme that my brain has like enjoyed looking at to be able to find information very quickly in that. But I'm so freaking lazy that every time that and I also hate using standard terminal on Mac because it's annoying to me about how the window layout is. And I like to put a bunch of plugins into it. So I use something called iTerm. So I can have like 12 terminal prompts open, all pointing to different repositories and different places on my operating system to automate stuff. But whenever that program updates or my computer restarts, it uses like the standard template when you restart that thing. That's just, nothing is basically enabled. And you just get a simple command prompt of one window. So then I have to go and like create all these different windows, split horizontally, split vertically, like do all this nonsense to get my 12 windows back. And there's templating that you can do in iTerm that'll say like start 12 windows. However, you can't apply configurations through like basically saved scripts within that program. It just doesn't support it. So I just wrote a bash script that says, hey, when I start up, or when the terminal starts up, execute this bash script, which just automates all of that, sets up my Conda environments, my PyEnv. If I'm doing Scala dev work, it ensures that I'm using it maps to one of the 4 like JVM versions that I have installed. If I'm doing like JavaScript work, I can configure through a config file. So like use node 20 for this. But if I'm doing it in another environment, I can change that to be like use node 18. So that's a GSD script. It sets up a dev environment. I'm not going to build a tool, or I'm going to like modify source code of iTerm in order to get it to like do this special thing. Because it just takes me like an hour to write that script that'll just set all this up for me.
Right.
So we all have tons of stuff like that. Never going to share it with anybody unless somebody asks, like, hey, I'm using iTerm and I hate having to manually do this. And they're like, hey, I got a script. And then somebody's like, this is awesome. Great. I'm going to change it a little bit because I don't like that your color scheme sucks. I'm like, sure, go ahead, man. It's bash script. So we share stuff like that all the time and have little things like that. So if it's just for you, build it how you're going to build it. But you'll know whether you're going to do it that way, or I need a Python library that it has like a high level API that has some configuration that I can pass in for these different edge cases for testing. Get validation first.
Got it. Yeah. Ben and I were recently at the Data and AI Summit for Databricks, and it's the annual conference, and we were part of several dinners. And one of those dinners, it was really interesting to see him give advice because I feel like a lot of junior people want to prove that they know things and then give answers. But there were a variety of scenarios posed by customers to Ben, and Ben simply said, well, when I was working with 16,000 customers back in my day, this is how we did it for all 16,000. You can do it that way, or you can not. But if you do it that way, at least for those customers, it worked a lot better. And that it was a lot less involved than I expected your answers to be. It was just like, this is how we've done it in the past. It's worked like 77% of the time. And you can do it this way and have 77% odds, or you can do it your own way and have unknown odds. You pick. So what is that? Just like to hammer home the question about how do you get people to have the idea that you want them to have? It seems like you just set up a scenario that made that idea the logical conclusion, but you stayed very far removed from the actual decision. Is that sort of the structure that you provide, or do you have more thoughts on that?
I mean, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt when they're asking me a question. They're not looking for, I mean, they might be looking for the just tell me what to do answer. And I'll flat out tell them, like, I don't know what's good for you. I have not walked that mile in your shoes. I don't know what you deal with on a day-to-day basis at your company. It could be that if I give the answer that I think is right and you go and try that, you're going to be like, that dude's an idiot. Like, of course this doesn't work. But if I give them options of like, hey, I've seen things similar to what you're talking about, and here's what worked, here's what didn't work, or this is what a lot of people choose to do, ball's in your court. Now that process of what I've done is I've given them data that they can now act on. I'm not giving them the answer that the data would inform for them to make a decision. And you're going to find that people are more willing to listen and retain what it is that you're talking about if they've had to go through that cognitive load of making a decision, even if it's something that they don't realize they're making a decision on. But that's a way to do effective technical communication where you're proposing just giving information or giving more context to somebody that they can then make an informed decision on. And now they own that decision. It's not, well, Ben told me this because this is the way things are done, but more like, well, Ben told me about all these stories of like things that he's seen. And I kind of was going like leaning on that direction to begin with. Now that I have this additional context, now I'm more convinced. So I'm doing this. Yeah. That's what's going on in their head. And you can help them make a decision by giving them factual data that you've seen. And you can also do it with the decision of like your project that we were just talking about. And by using those leading questions about, hey, if you're wondering why people aren't using this, did you go through a process that would have given you that data in order to determine, make that decision? And by doing that post hoc, like you've already built the thing. And like, if I was being blunt with you, I would have been like, who told you to build this? Like, why did you build this? And that's just rude, right? That's not productive. You're going to feel attacked. You're going to feel like, I'm not going to listen to this guy. He's just being a jerk. But if I asked you that question, like, how did you collect the information about why this was so important to build and promote? And you'll have that inner realization of like, oh, so that's how this is done. But that'll now be a lesson because you're now aware of the right way to do that. You'll never, ever forget that. You'll be like, hey, before I write anything that I'm going to try to get people to use, people need to tell me that they need this thing.
Right.
And then I need to involve them in the process of, hey, I have version 0.0.1 that only does this like very small subset. Can you test this and tell me if it works the way that you expect it? Or how does this feel when you use it? Is this good? Yes or no? Would I use this? Yes or no? And you get that feedback before you've already invested a ton of time and energy into something, where if you wait till after you release it and you get all that negative feedback, or people are just like, don't care, not interested, don't need it. You get that later on, you can't go back easily and fix that stuff because you've already built the whole thing out.
Right. Cool. So your way to reframe my very stubborn self who has dug his heels in and will not think that anybody's feedback is valid, you would just say, hey, this is how we do it at Databricks, and maybe consider opening your mind, and then hoping that I make my own conclusion that you're potentially right.
I mean, I would continue to ask questions until I hear that from you. I wouldn't tell you like, hey, you should have done this differently. I'm waiting to hear that sentence of like, man, I really should have like asked for help or asked for feedback very early on and throughout the process if I wanted people to promote this.
Cool.
And if I don't hear that, that's when I'll go into by telling it in a personalized way of like, this is how we do it at Databricks engineering. That's partially true. This is how software is developed everywhere. Like every big tech company that's involved in generating software for other people to use, that's how this is agile software development. This is it in a nutshell. Like, do product design, get feedback, release first iteration that's buggy and broken and is kind of a mess, get feedback, find bugs, do bug bashes, iterate on next version of it, get feedback, fix things, build new features. And you do that progressively as long as there's still excitement and requests for new features to be added. If it's going to make you money, or it's going to make customers happier, it's going to solve more problems, keep on building onto it. But if it solves everything that it's set out to do and you're not getting any more requests from it, but you can do instrumentation, track how many people are using it, or just ask people like, hey, are you still using this? Whatever. Having that feedback loop tells you when it's been long enough, it gives you a stopping point of when does this become feature complete and it's now in maintenance mode. And then also, when do I turn off maintenance mode? When is this no longer relevant and I don't have to support it anymore and I can just delete this thing because nobody needs it anymore? And that's it's not something Databricks specific. This is like just software like product software development
Yeah,
at its
101.
core.
Right.
But a lot of teams don't do that because they don't have customers of their software or of the thing that they're doing. They have a problem to solve. So when you're talking with the team that is maintaining some applied usage of a framework, like, hey, we're trying to predict fraud, at our company, and we have this model and all this data that's coming in. Can you solve that problem in a very simple way that's easy to maintain, is flexible? And sure, but to your end customer, which is the fraud department, and your CFO who's worried about how much money is going out the door from fraudulent activity, they don't care how you solve that or what you built to solve that. So those teams that are working on building software to solve a problem like that, they don't have any incentive to go and ask somebody like the CFO. They're not going to be like, hey, do you think we should build a framework for this? Or should we just build the simplest thing possible, like a notebook with its version controlled, that we have a notebook that trains the models. We have a notebook that handles tracking and logging of the models and versioning. We have a notebook for deployment that's very easy for us to read and write comments in and get it so that we can collaborate on this. Or should we go and build a fraud detection framework that is a compiled code that now has to go through this very complex CI/CD process in order to be run in production, and it's a nightmare to maintain. Nobody knows when it goes awry. Nobody knows how to debug it because it's so complex. That end customer of theirs doesn't care. They care if it's wrong, but that is tangential, completely tangential to how that thing is built.
Right.
But their fellow customers in that respect, the person who's working on that project, the customer is their peers who are on call. Can they fix this thing when it blows up?
Right.
Really quickly? Can they close that ticket that comes in? Yep, it threw an exception on line 347, but I can totally fix it in a half an hour and deploy the fix and everything's good. But on the framework route, it's well, we're gonna have to take 3 or 4 days to fix this because this is pretty complicated.
Right.
And yeah.
Heard. Okay. I have one more question about the framework. So the steps that are materializing in my mind, first is read the room. Second, root cause the issue. Third, collaboratively brainstorm on solutions to the issue, and then hopefully go do them. But it feels like there should be a fourth step of gathering whether the input that you provided actually led to a solution. And if you work in an organization and you're, for instance, doing these steps within your team, it's pretty easy to see, all right, did the feature get shipped? Did the process change? Whatever it might be. But do you have a good way to go back and gather feedback on how successful your input was? Because that would help you iterate as a person as well.
I don't know if there's a good way to do that or a point of doing that that's based in collecting of data. I've never worked in a team that actually does something like that, so I don't really know. But I know that teams, the team that I'm on right now, nobody cares about stuff like that. We care about what the team has done. And there's individual recognition for hey, this person built this super cool thing. That's for their own personal career growth and getting exposed to new things to have them grow as an engineer, and wherever they want their career to go, you work on projects that are related to that or roles within a project that are adjacent to that. But on evaluating, hey, who built this one feature and how is it performing over time, and what was their impact to the creation of this over time, it never is clean like that.
Right.
It would be impossible to disambiguate all of the other influences that happen, because once you ship it, it's now in maintenance or it's in feature improvement. So somebody else is going to touch it, or somebody else might go and refactor the whole thing. So now you're like, well, it's not one person, it's like 4 people. There was one person that originally built it, but a bunch of people have changed it and improved it. So it's really the team that is building these things.
Right. Okay. That's a good point.
So it's always a team event. It's a team event once you go into production. It can be a team event for big things that are like, okay, there's too much work here for one person to do. So that person might have been like a project lead for something, and they delegated like different implementation things to other people. That happens all the time. But once it ships, like, it's just the team that supports it, or sometimes the entire organization if it's super critical.
Right.
That would be like trying to attribute, like, well, what one engineer at Databricks can we attribute like the performance of the data frame API? Right? Like,
Yeah.
I know who came up with the idea. I know who built the prototype, but it's probably 100 people have touched that code base that involves with that, at least.
Yeah.
And now it's probably upwards of 400. So yeah, it's nobody looks at stuff like that. We look at the project as a whole and the entire organization to say, like, are we keeping this in a state of constant improvement over time? And are people successful with this? And how much usage do we have with this?
Cool. All right. I am absolutely crystal clear on how to influence behavior within an organization. Do you have any closing thoughts before I wrap?
I mean, I think the biggest part of it when having like these sort of difficult conversations is to really just double down on empathy. Like, put yourself in the position of that person and think about how you would want to collaborate with somebody to fix something that you screwed up. Do you want somebody who is interacting with you that feels like they have your back and nobody cares whose fault it was? Like, it shouldn't be a blame-filled thing. It's irrelevant. If you want somebody to grow and you want somebody to learn these new techniques, work with them. And that it's like that ability to work with somebody and get them to see alternative ways to think about something is just giving them more wisdom, and they'll learn more and they'll get better, so that 5-6 years from that point that you're having that conversation, they're going to do that for 5 other people. And all of a sudden you're building more of this sort of awareness and knowledge within that organization of people being like, hey, before we go and do something like this, let's plan this out. Let's talk to people. Let's get feedback. And then maybe we'll go and build it this way. Never underestimate the ability or the power of peer review.
Heard. Okay, cool. Well, today we talked about how to influence behavior within an organization. It seems like it's a 3-step process, or at least to get started. The first is read the room. If you're part of the team, that should be easy. But if you're an external consultant specifically, it's important to have cameras on and try to figure out whose decision actually matters. Second is root cause the issue. So figure out the true reason why there's an issue. And then third, collaboratively brainstorm on solutions and then do them. Some do's and don'ts. On the do's side, listen and be kind. This is also called having empathy. And then when looking to change behavior, try to get the person to have the idea. The reasoning for that is they'll champion the idea a lot more and build on it a lot more easily if they think it's theirs. One little tip when reading the room is figure out who talks the most. Typically, whoever speaks about your questions, they are the owner of that project and incepted that project. And then finally, if all else fails and you're getting a lot of pushback, you can take a step back and say how you have solved the solution in the past. Then one very tangible don't come in and be the answer person without context or empathy. No one likes a smart ass, myself included. And instead of being the answer person, give anecdotal pieces of data that lead people in the right direction. Anything else?
Excellent recap.
Cool. Until next time, it's been Michael Burke and my co-host,
Ben Wilson.
and have a good day, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.